One day, Sir Handel was taking a long train of slate down from the slate mines. It was a beautiful day. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. Sir Handel couldn't have felt better. He was just in a good mood. Ahead was a hill. Sir Handel had to go over the hill on his way back to the yard. He huffed up it as hard as he could, but he didn't have the strength, so he had to stop halfway up. Oh darn, this ruined my lovely morning. His driver telephoned for help. Rusty had to leave his train at the lakeside to go help Sir Handel. When he arrived, he was coupled up to the brake van and began to push. Two little engines huffed up the hill. But the brake van began to derail. Rusty was worried and began to slow down. The whole way up the hill, he was careful not to derail the brake van. Once Sir Handel was on his way, Rusty went back to the lakeside to get his train. Later, Rusty was stopped at a station. Some of his friends were there talking in a siding. Sir Handel was telling everyone about the day's adventures so far. Rusty told them about how he almost derailed the brake van. Duke and Sir Handel looked at each other and began to laugh. Duncan and Rusty were very confused. "Oh, this reminds me of a story." "Wait, you need to tell the story of your friend being turned into a generator." "Oh, I'm saving that story for later. So a long time ago, when Peter Sam was still called Stuart and Sir Handel Falcon, we worked on our own little railway. Those two engines were young and restless back then, and I had to keep them in order. Falcon here used to think that I was a nuisance and useless. It was during the middle of the summer one year, and I had just finished my daily passenger train to the lake, when I was asked to take a long goods train. I was usually the only one who could take the long enough trains because I had a tender and could haul more without stopping. So I took that long train up to the mountains. I had been gone for quite some time when I finally reached the mountains. It was hard to pull heavy trains after a while, so I had to give up." "What did you do?" "Well, back in those days it was hard to get a hold of people in faraway places. So my crew had to hike down the mountain." "How awful." "Well, he got down and was able to get a hold of someone to come help us. Stuart came to the rescue. Once he finally arrived, he tried to help. But it was no use. The train was too heavy. So Stuart went back down the mountain and found Falcon. Falcon wasn't happy at all, but he went. Once they both arrived, they pushed and I pulled. We finally got the train moving again. I had to constantly yell at them to push harder. That made Falcon cross, and he wanted to get back at me. Eventually, out of anger, he charged into Stuart, pushing him into the brake van. Oh, it was a horrible mess." "What happened?" "Well, Sir Handel, or I guess Falcon, had to go back and get workmen to clear up the mess, and I had to take the train piece by piece to the mountains. It was evening by the time we all got home. Falcon was still mad at me and didn't say sorry. Eventually, though, I did save him from falling off a cliff, and he's been nice to me ever since." Duke laughed while looking at Sir Handel. Sir Handel rolled his eyes and puffed away. Everyone chuckled and then went back to their work. Every night on the island of Sodor, the engines come home to Tidmouth Sheds. They are cleaned for the night, they rest their wheels, and sleep until the next morning for another hard day's work. The engines like Tidmouth Sheds, but they sometimes forget how important the sheds are. One evening, Percy was very excited to get home. He didn't have the mail train tonight, and he had gotten his work done early so he could be the first one back to the sheds. As he rushed in, he saw Gordon coming into the sheds as well. Percy wanted to be first. "Slow down, champ!" But Percy didn't. The turntable wasn't turned to Percy's line, and Percy crashed into the turntable. The turntable was a mess. Luckily, Percy's crew had jumped clear. Percy felt embarrassed. Later that night, all the engines crowded around the sheds. "Gosh sakes, Percy, what happened here?" "What a careless engine, running yourself into the turntable." Percy was ashamed. Sir Topham Hatt drove up. He inspected the damages. "Percy, look at this carelessness. Now you will have to go to the works and the turntable will need to be repaired. All the engines will have nowhere to sleep for the night." Sir Topham Hatt fumed away to try and make arrangements for the engines. Percy felt worse than ever. Duck pushed the breakdown train up and lifted Percy on a flatbed, and Henry took Percy to the works. The other engines were cross because now they had no place to sleep. "What are we going to do now?" "It looks like we'll have to find somewhere else to sleep." So that night, all the engines went around the island searching for a place to sleep. Duck and Oliver slept under the cover of Kirk Ronan Station. Edward and Boko slept at the yard at Wellsworth. Meanwhile, Thomas puffed up his branch line to the quarry. He found Toby and Mavis there. "Can I sleep here tonight?" "I'm sorry, Thomas, we don't have any more room in the shed." "Oh, but Thomas, you could sleep under the cover of the hopper if you'd like." So Thomas pushed the cars out of the way and fell asleep under the hopper. James and the Scottish twins took all the coaches out of the coach shed, then they slept in the shed, leaving the coaches out in the open. Gordon had to take the midnight train to pick up Lady Hat from the other side of the island. He didn't have time to find a place to sleep. And Percy and Henry spent the night at the workshed. During that night, a large storm blew over Sodor. It rained very hard. There was a lot of thunder and lightning. All the engines couldn't sleep because of the noise. They all wished they could be back in Tidmouth Sheds. At the quarry, a workman was leaving when he saw a flash of lightning. He was so scared he jumped back and hit the switch to the hopper. The hopper dumped stones all over Thomas. Botheration! All the engines had a horrible night. The next morning, the engines were very tired. No one had gotten any sleep, and they were all very dirty from the rainstorm. Thomas left the quarry and went to the washdown. When he arrived, there was a long line for the washdown. James, Donald, and Douglas had to clean the dirty coaches that they had left out during the night. The other engines were there too. They were all dirty from the rain. I wish Tidmouth Sheds' turntable was fixed. He and the other engines missed the nice warm comfort of sleeping in Tidmouth Sheds. The washdown wasn't the only problem during that day. Boko got into an accident when he dozed off and missed a red signal. Later, Thomas went to the yard to pick up Annie and Clarabelle, where he found out that they had been left out during the night too. They were filthy from the rain. Thomas didn't have time to go get them clean, so Thomas took them to the platform. The passengers weren't pleased. They did not like the dirty coaches. "Doesn't the controller keep the coaches clean? Why don't they have any proper coaches, not these filthy beach huts?" the passengers complained. Annie and Clarabelle were embarrassed. Later, Duck and Oliver were double-heading a goods train. But Oliver fell asleep because he was so tired. Duck had to pull the goods train all by himself. By the end of the day, all the engines were cross. A few days later, Sir Topham Hatt called the engines to Tidmouth Sheds. Percy was sitting on a newly fixed turntable. "Percy is sorry for what he did, and he wishes to apologize to all of you." "I'm sorry for messing up the turntable. I think we all realize that it's a big dilemma not having a turntable to get to our sheds." The engines looked at each other, and amongst each other they smiled. "Tidmouth Sheds is a place that we need to be grateful for, and the protection it gives us. So without any further to-do, I welcome all of you home." The engines whistled in delight and were happy to be back in their nice warm shed. Rusty is the only narrow-gauge diesel engine. He mostly gets along with everyone. Normally he works at the slate mines, but he also patrols the lines, making sure that they are safe for the other engines to run on. One day Rusty was working at the slate mines. He shunted some trucks up to the incline. He waited. Afterwards, he backed up onto the loaded cars. He was coupled up and tried to pull the train away, but Rusty couldn't move. Duncan was helping out at the incline, and he came to see what was the matter. "What's wrong, Rusty?" "I don't know. I can't pull this train. Something must be wrong with me." Duncan pushed Rusty to a siding. Then he took the train of slate away. Later, Sir Handel arrived and took Rusty away. Sir Handel took Rusty to the sheds. Later, Duke brought some workmen to inspect Rusty. Finally, they found out what was wrong. Rusty's engine did not look good. Rusty was not allowed to work for the rest of the day, so the little diesel had to wait in the sheds. Rusty watched as the other engines were busy with their work. That evening, Sir Topham Hatt came to see Rusty. "Rusty, I'm sorry I have some bad news. Parts of your engines have gone bad. I would normally send you to the works, but they don't have the proper parts for you. They also don't have the space for you to stay there and wait, so you will have to wait here until the parts arrive from the mainland. I'm very sorry, Rusty." Rusty was sad. He had to stay in the shed for the next several days. A few days later, Edward was taking a train of scrap to the other railway. Edward stopped to talk to Rusty. "Good morning, Rusty." "Hello." "What are you doing still in the sheds on this fine morning?" Rusty told Edward the bad news about his engine. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that. I hope your parts come soon." and Edward puffed away. Rusty sighed. The next few days, Rusty still stayed in the shed. His worn-out engine was getting dustier and dustier each day. One day, Sir Handel was feeling sick, or so he said, and there was no one to take the midday train. All the other engines were busy with their usual work. At the sheds, Rheneas brought some workmen. They inspected Rusty from top to bottom. Rusty asked what they were doing, but they were too busy to answer. Then the workmen left, and Rusty was alone, except for the supposedly sick Sir Handel. The foreman soon arrived. "Rusty, you seem to be up for the job. I need you to take the midday train." Rusty was still worried about his engine, but wanted to be really useful again. Rusty accepted, and found some coaches. He was sure his engine would last one more trip, but then he realized how hard it was to pull the train. The coaches were empty, but felt very heavy. Rusty felt weak. Soon enough, Rusty arrived at the station. Gordon pulled in with the express. The passengers began boarding Rusty's coaches. Rusty suddenly got an itch in his nose. He tried to fight it, but he couldn't. Rusty sneezed. Achoo! Dust from his engine flew everywhere. Gordon was filthy. "Cinders and ashes!" "Oh dear, I'm terribly sorry, Gordon." Rusty was embarrassed, and now he couldn't move. Rusty was stuck. The passengers were cross. The station master tried to sort everything out. Some workmen called the yard, and Sir Handel had to come to the rescue. Rusty was shunted to another line, and Sir Handel took the train. "I'm sorry, Gordon." Gordon was very upset for how dirty he was, but he felt bad for the little diesel engine. "Oh, it's okay. Nothing a washdown can't take care of. But what about you? I think from now on we'll have to call you Dusty Rusty." Rusty chuckled. The workmen hurried and cleaned up Gordon as best as they could. The station master came out to talk to Rusty. "We'll have to pay for all the damage you've done. I would punish you for this incident, but lucky for you, your new engine parts just arrived, so you'll be going to the works." Although he felt terrible for what had happened, Rusty was happy now that there would be no more engine troubles. Rusty's recent accident had caused a great deal of trouble for the railway. The workmen, the engine crew, and even Sir Topham Hatt were all uptight about things. The engines were cross too. They already had a lot of work, and now they had even more work to do with Rusty gone. All this anger had spread a bad atmosphere in the yard. Even visiting engines could tell. One afternoon, Peter Sam was resting in a shed. It was a hot day, and he was tired from his work. Duncan pulled into the shed. He had just arrived with his train of passengers and was resting while his passengers disembarked. "Aye, too much work." "I agree." Normally Peter Sam is a nice little engine and is usually very kind, but all the extra work had made him grumpy. "Rusty has just ruined it for us." "I told you that here smelly diesel was no good. Anyways, have you heard?" "Heard what?" "Sir Topham Hatt is coming to visit the railway." "Why?" Because he wants to see how the railway is functioning after having all the extra work. Peter Sam huffed. It had sparked his curiosity. Peter Sam's driver arrived. Come on, old boy, we need to get home. I hear they have some special news for you. What is it? Wait and see. Peter Sam said goodbye to Duncan and left. The whole way home he was curious and hurried down the line as fast as he could. The manager told Peter Sam that he would be taking the special train for Sir Topham Hatt. Be at the station tomorrow at 9 o'clock sharp. Peter Sam was now excited. For the rest of the day, Peter Sam became very impatient as he did his work. He kept asking his driver what time it was. That evening, Peter Sam took some fruit and vegetables to a local market in a village. By the time he delivered the goods, it was getting late. So Peter Sam took the branch line down to the quarry and stayed the night with Bertram. The next morning, Peter Sam woke up early and set off down the line. At a station, he picked up his coaches. He raced down the tracks as fast as he could. He was very excited. Up ahead, the distance signal was red. Whoa, boy, we need to slow down, in case there's danger up ahead. But Peter Sam didn't want to slow down. He was being impatient. Up ahead, there was trouble. A cow had strayed onto the line, and Duke, with his goods train, was stuck. Peter Sam tried to apply his brakes, but it was too late. Peter Sam ran right into Duke's brake van. Luckily, no one was hurt, but the guard had jumped clear beforehand. Miraculously, Peter Sam's buffer beam wasn't bent either. The driver phoned back to the yard, and Skarloey brought a brake van full of workmen up the line. The workmen worked fast and got Peter Sam back on the rails. Peter Sam then took the loop line around Duke while the workmen tried to shoo the cow away. When Peter Sam arrived at the station, he was very late. Sir Topham Hatt was on the platform and was very cross. Peter Sam, you are very late. I cannot allow a railway to run like this. Yes, sir. You will need to learn patience if you want to stay on this railway. Sir Topham Hatt climbed in a coach, and Peter Sam puffed away. For the rest of the day, Peter Sam showed Sir Topham Hatt the railway. From the day's events, Peter Sam decided that it was probably wise for him to try and be early to where he needed to be, not rushing everywhere just to be on time. Rusty the diesel engine had finally returned from the works. He had parts replaced on his engine, and he had no more problems. While he was away, however, the engines had had lots of work. All the engines were cross with him while he was away. When he got back, they realized it wasn't his fault and forgave him. All the engines, except Duncan and Sir Handel. They were still very rude to Rusty. One day, Rusty was working up at the slate mines with Sir Handel, Duncan, and Duke. They were all working hard and getting the job done. Rusty was being coupled up to some loaded trucks as Sir Handel was pushing some empty ones to the incline. "If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have so much work to do here." "That's right. This railway has one diesel, and that's one too many." Rusty was sad. Duke came up. "Shut up! You both have had more accidents in the last year than Rusty has ever had. You two need to learn to bite your tongues instead of speaking without thinking. Little engines like you are to be seen and not heard." And Duke puffed away. Sir Handel and Duncan behaved better after that. That evening, Rusty went to go to sleep in the siding behind the sheds. He felt bad about the things Duncan and Sir Handel had said. He didn't think he could sleep in the shed with the other engines. Boko, the diesel engine, was returning from the other railway to go back home. He stopped beside Rusty. "Why do you look so down?" Rusty liked Boko from the times they had met before, and Boko would understand his problems, because Boko was a diesel too. Rusty told Boko about what Sir Handel and Duncan had said. I understand. A lot of engines at first didn't like me, especially James. But after a while, they soon accepted me. Besides, on the other railway there aren't any steam engines." Rusty was surprised. "There aren't any?" "Only on special railways like the Bluebell Railway, but other than that, we diesels run everything on the mainland." "Why is that?" "We're versatile, and cheaper to run. We're more efficient, and we can pull a lot more than steam engines." Wow! Rusty had no idea that diesels were used more than steam engines everywhere else. Rusty always thought that steam engines were used more than diesels because of the way it was on his railway. "But don't let this get to your head." "Why not?" "Because a lot of diesels on the mainland can be very rude to steam engines. You don't want to become like them. You won't have any friends." Just then the signal turned green. "Looks like I need to go. I hope that made you feel better, Rusty." "Oh, it did. Thank you." And Boko left to go back to Wellsworth. Rusty slept well that night. The next day, Duke told the other engines what Sir Handel and Duncan had said to Rusty yesterday. "Those mean engines! It wasn't Rusty's fault. They shouldn't be so rude to him. Oh, I can't believe them." "I agree with you all, but we can't just talk about this and do nothing. Something must be done. I think we can all agree on that." Later, Peter, Sam, and Skarloey were helping Bertram up at the quarry. It was dirty work. Duncan puffed in to pick up some trucks. Skarloey came up beside him. "How can you be so inconsiderate to Rusty?" Duncan knew what Skarloey was talking about, and he didn't want to be scolded a second time, so Duncan hurried away. Fiddlesticks! Later, Peter Sam met up with Duke. He told Duke what happened between Skarloey and Duncan. "I guess they won't cooperate, so we'll talk to someone who will make them." When Duke took his train to the big station, he talked to the foreman and Sir Topham Hatt. "Thank you, Duke. I'm glad you brought this to my attention. I will have a word with them." And indeed, Sir Topham Hatt did, and quite a few. That night at the shed, Sir Topham Hatt came. He spoke to Duncan and Sir Handel. "I understand you've been giving Rusty a hard time." Both engines were silent. "I've heard what you've said, and let me tell you, if I find it happening again, you will regret it. Rusty is the diesel of this railway. He has always been kind to help out others and help out around the railway. I've seen many diesels in my days, and a good majority I've sent home with a frown on their face. Rusty is different. That's why I've kept him. He is a really useful engine." And on that note, Sir Topham Hatt left. Hello, I'm Sir Handel. If you enjoyed this video, click the subscribe button to subscribe for more Thomas and Friends videos. You can also check out more videos on our YouTube channel by clicking the Visit Channel button. If you want to learn more about the up-and-coming latest adventures from Sodor, and to find out about the latest updates, then click the News Blog button. You can also check out the Google Plus and our Facebook page by clicking a link in the description. We hope to see you again soon. Come back often for more videos.